Hello, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a while. It feels like it's been a while for me anyway, and that is because I have been living by my mantra for the year, my little promise to myself of doing one thing at a time. And as a type A person, recovering overachiever with a history of perfectionism, oldest daughter, what's the word for it? Is it parentification, where you have to parent your parents? Anyway, as a person who is all of those things, doing one thing at a time has been the hardest challenge that I have set myself. You do your own social work analysis of that. Usually my mantras for the year are a bit self-beliefy, but this has been something very active. I've had to make a real choice and I've had to let lots of things go. So I love to do a weekly podcast. That hasn't really happened this year and I just have to be okay with it. Like, I can't do all the things. I'm writing a book, I'm setting up another arm of the business, I'm home educating my two lovely children, trying to have a life and, not just exist for work. So anyway, that's a long-winded introduction to say that I'm back with a guest episode. This conversation was with Dez Holmes. In light of the fact that I am doing one thing at a time, I think we maybe had this conversation about 6 weeks ago, and it's taken me this long to get it to the point of uploading it and recording a little intro. If you can hear background noise, by the way, it's because I'm melting and I need all the windows open. Yeah, it was very cool to talk to Dez. It felt very full circle, which I think we talk about in the conversation, because research in practice has been with me through my social work career. So I've always loved to learn, and I now also work as an associate trainer for research in practice, so I get to deliver those materials, and it's something that I love to do. Every session that I deliver, there is always really amazing feedback on the quality of the material, which is all developed by research in practice. I guess what I love about it is it's like the research material understands the flexibility of the job, and it's almost like it's kind. I don't know if that's a funny way to describe training material, but that's how it feels to me delivering it, and hopefully how it feels to everybody else who receives it. And we don't just talk about research and practice in this podcast. Des talks her career. I think we just go down multiple tangents. It's my best kind of conversation. There's a LinkedIn rant, but also like really, really useful reflections that I've been stewing on about what we share online, how we share it, and what Des says, which is, am I being useful? Is it useful? And I've really held on to that. There's loads of amazing little snaps of this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Make sure you are subscribed, leave me a comment. Is it a comment? No, a review, and all my details of how to get in touch with me and everything else. It's all on the show notes of this podcast. Enjoy listening to the conversation. Okay, so Des, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I wanted to start with not a boring check-in, so I would love to know, is there a song or an album or a piece of art that describes how your day is going or how your week is going?
This is very on brand of me. I couldn't come up with one clear answer. So I've got this sort of magpie scattergun response. This is the question I thought about most in advance because I found it really hard. The first thing that sprang to mind was the absolute queen that is Dolly Parton, 9 to 5, but only because it starts with stumbling out of bed and drinking coffee. And there the similarities end because I do not work a 9 to 5. No one in a leadership role in a charity does. And I certainly don't work for the man. So it was really only the first line that kind of really gripped me. I considered whether Busy Woman by Sabrina Carpenter might be relevant, but I have issues with the rampant marketing of sexualized tropes to little girls, so I decided not so much. I guess probably more accurately, my average week would involve the Gladys Knight version, the original version of Midnight Train to Georgia, although more accurately, Midnight Rail Replacement Service to Bristol Temple Meads. There have been some days where all three meals have come from a pumpkin cafe, and my God, my weight shows it. More seriously, actually, if I think about music and my work, and I'm one of those awful people that I don't buy music. I listen to my partner and my mate Spotify. I listen to lots of really dweeby
Yeah.
podcasts. But the exception is when I'm writing, when I'm doing like long form writing, I have to listen to music and I can't listen to anything with words in because my brain starts typing the words. So when I'm writing like long bids or doing the book recently on transitional safeguarding, and I can really like write through the night and into weekends and things, I either have to listen to classical music, which makes me sound very highbrow. I'm not, or a 90s jungle because I can't have anything with words in it. And I am convinced that you can tell whether I was listening to jungle or classical music in my writing. I feel like it's got a different vibe depending.
So funny. I think I'm going to reread your stuff and decide what I think you were listening to at the time.
I'm dead old fashioned. I can't get into a sort of tepid house. I need a drop or I can't dance. I'm old
Yeah,
school like that.
I love that. What was your book on transitional safeguarding? Was it more classical or was it more jungle?
Uh, I'm not even going to tell you which chapters are which, but there was a difference because if I'm writing late at night, my brain quite often feels like it kicks in about 8 p.m., which is brilliant for the average British working day. And late at night, it doesn't feel very fair on my neighbours to be listening to 90s jungle. So I would
Yeah.
be more demure and choose Debussy and things. But I'm convinced you can see the difference. Like that, you always hear these things that oh, plants grow differently depending on what music you play. Then I'm convinced
Yeah.
it's through my writing.
Oh, that's so interesting. I love asking that question. It reminds we'll talk about research and practice in a second, but there's like really good training that I've delivered for research and practice, which talks about actually how much we can learn from people depending on the question that we ask when we think about children's identity. So when I think back and like when I first started the podcast, I used to probably just say, "Who are you? Where are you from?" Which I'll probably ask in a second. But I like opening. I like music too. So that's helpful. Tells me more about people. And so if anybody is listening and they have been living under a rock, can you let them know a little bit about who you are and a little bit about research and practice?
Yeah, so my name's Des Holmes and I am the Director of Research and Practice. And I'm also, as of today, the Deputy Chief Executive of the National Children's Bureau, which Research and Practice became part of a couple of years ago. So Research and Practice was set up in 1996. I was not the director then. My moisturizer's not that good. And it was interesting. I always love this bit of the origin story. It was set up at the request of directors of social services, as they were then
Oh,
called,
wow.
in the Southwest, who could see that there was various sort of mechanisms in place to help leaders in the health sector access robust evidence and thought, why haven't we got that? And so RIP was born. And then in around 2005-ish, I think, Research and Practice for Adults was created. And at that time, both RIP and RIPFA, as they were known, were part of something called the Dartington Hall Trust. And in essence, we help people who work with children and adults to use evidence in their work. Really specifically, we support evidence-informed practice. And that's a little bit different to what people usually mean when they say evidence-based practice. Both are really important, but evidence-based practice tends to mean, not always, but tends to mean there's like a manualized program or intervention. It's been tested under lab conditions
Yeah.
in layperson speak, and it's very rooted in that kind of robust trial or quasi-experimental research. Really important stuff, like some parenting programs be a good example, or literacy programs. What we mean when we say evidence-informed practice is a little bit broader. We're talking about bringing together robust, relevant research and theory, but also professional wisdom or practice expertise. And thirdly, the evidence that's born out of people's lived experience and trying to plat these different sources of knowledge together to create a richer picture. So there is really important organizations like What Works Centres, for example, who do a great
Mm,
job of really disseminating kind of insights about what works, things we can test. They've got a start and a finish and a target group and a control group and all the rest of it. And that's really important. And what we try to do is add value to that and help people think about what if questions and what matters questions and how might questions in
mm.
addition to what works questions.
And since you have been the director, what have been some of the biggest changes that you've seen in the way? That's a big question. I guess I'm thinking about in the way that research and practice has been received by people or maybe needed by people.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've seen some really significant changes, and I think some internal changes. We brought together RIP and RIPFA, so the adults and the children,
Yeah.
into one organization, one brand, one website. That was a really big deal for us and our members. And our membership network spans the length and breadth of the country. So the vast majority of local authorities and a whole bunch of like health organizations and charities and others are in our network now. That's been a change, actually, the continued growth of the network, which I'm just so proud of the team and also really proud that we're useful, still useful to the sector after all these years. It really matters to us when
Yeah.
organisations are as cash strapped as they are to be funding support from us, to be investing and getting their staff help from us. That really matters to us. We've seen on a more strategic level, there's been a real shift in how people think about evidence. When RIP first started under the brilliant founder Celia Atherton, I think fair to say people were still debating whether evidence mattered in this kind of work. And that debate is thankfully gone. And there's now much richer debate about how we use evidence, not whether we need to use evidence. And for me, that's a really positive move. I also think that in more recent years, we've seen other organisations adopt a much broader conceptualisation of evidence, which is really great to see. So for a little while, we felt like the oddballs going, oh, it's not only trials. And actually, lots of people now talk about evidence coming in many forms and sources. I often sort of describe to people that you think about knowledge as a tapestry, not a hierarchy. It's not that one person's lived experience weighs more than a randomized control trial. It's not that research weighs more than practice wisdom. They're answering different questions and in different ways. And it
Yeah.
seems to me that the role of the evidence user is to plat the bread, to see what the whole of that picture tells us. And I think there's also a change in how wider sector actors, even some policymakers, think about evidence, that evidence doesn't always give us, in fact, it rarely, in my view, gives us definitive cast iron answers, but it should always help us ask better, more insightful questions. And it's been
Yeah.
quite rewarding and joyful to see that shifting, more nuanced approach to evidence. Obviously, of course, for RIP as well, joining the National Children's Bureau is a really big deal for us, really exciting
Yeah.
move. Great to be connected up with things like the Council for Disabled Children and the Anti-Bullying Alliance, the Child Bereavement Network, and NCB's brilliant participation team and policy team. That was a really big deal for us. And I think as well, there's something that hasn't changed in my mind, in my time at Research in Practice, is that one of the really lovely bits of my role is we are really informed by the sector, led by the sector's priorities. We are able to be independent. We don't receive grant funding. We don't have any philanthropic backers. Although if you've got any really rich listeners, do reach out on LinkedIn, won't you? We don't have to sell magazines to exist. There's a degree of independence and authenticity that I just find really important, and it feels like a real privilege to do that kind of work because it's not easy. It's tough times to be running a charity and to be making an offer to a sector under pressure. So RIP exists for as long as we're useful, and yeah, it feels like a privilege to be part of something that's useful.
Oh, so useful. I remember because I think when I just love learning anyway, so it was always just like when I got to the university library, I was like, this is amazing. And then when I moved from like practice to being a newly qualified social worker, which was 11 years ago, I remember my authority had research in practice and I was like, this is amazing because I'm not just, it's almost like there was no like ASYE as it is now, but I was like, oh, I have all this to help me. It's almost like it holds you up, I find, and you can go and read. So it's been really nice. I think every authority I've ever worked in has had it. So then to be in the position of then delivering the training, I think what you said about it helping people to ask better questions, it must be so nice because that obviously happens on a wider policy level, but that's what happens for practice as well, which I think is really, it's really nice that it mirrors on all levels.
Yeah, it seems to me that a really important part of how we think about ourselves at Research in Practice and at NCB more widely is we're here to help really skilled, committed colleagues have a bit of a think. That's not our strap line, but it would be if I didn't have a brilliant comms team who stopped me from adding strap lines like that. But that's the point, isn't it? You've got great people doing this work who are really committed and they're not passive. They're not these empty vessels waiting for someone else to top them up with some clever or endless sort of, we're going to dictate to you what you must do, prescriptive kind of guidance. More to create space for a bit of critical reflection, a bit of critical thinking, a sense of kind of contextualizing new knowledge in line with your ethos and your ethics and
Mm.
your local kind of community's needs. And that to me feels like the thoughtful, enriching work. I also think, on a personal level, who the hell am I to be telling anyone how to do their day jobs? It just feels really inappropriate.
Yeah, I know it always feel like delivering the training, it always feels almost like an offer of here's some stuff. It's never as simple as that, obviously, but
Here's some
like,
stuff, have a think.
yeah, here it is, and you probably know this already, but maybe it's helpful. A bit like a lot of the time, if we work with families, they probably know lots of things already, and we're just a bit of a mirror to reflect it back.
I think you're right on that. And I sometimes talk about that actually, that the way in which those of us who are trying to help professionals engage with those professionals needs to mirror what we hope professionals are doing with the families they serve.
Mm,
There's a researcher that I quote quite often, called Green, talks about the fallacy of the pipeline, this myth that knowledge is made over here by the clever people, then it gets
yeah.
sprayed down the pipeline onto the professionals, and then the magic will happen and we'll
Mm,
scare quote deliver outcomes. There's a myth and a half. And the trouble with that fallacy of the pipeline, as Green says, it relies on the fallacy of the empty vessel. The idea that practitioners are sat there waiting to be told someone else is clever, and then they'll be
mm,
activated and do their practice. And we wouldn't want citizens to be passive recipients of social work support. We
yeah.
want to be active agents, engaged in co-producing change and learning together. And so it seems to me really important that we don't position professionals as passive recipients either.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm also just thinking, did I just skim over something really big that when you said like you're now the something in the NCB and I've just not, when your brain like starts to process information, you
Not
said
at
as of
all.
today and I just ignored it.
No, not at all. It's only because I'm trying to remember that is now a thing. Like I haven't changed my email signature yet, and I probably should at some point.
Oh, so go on, tell me more about that. That's exciting.
But yeah, that's pretty exciting. So we became part of the National Children's Bureau February 24. I'm gonna have to fact check that. What even is time? I'm also a woman in her 40s, so I forget everything all the time. It's true. Do you know, I introduced myself in a meeting recently and said my name was Harriet because the chair's name was Harriet, and that was all it took to completely
One
confuse my
thing.
brain. Yeah, I'm not an advert for these collagen supplements. They're making zero difference, I can tell you. Anyway, get back on track, Des. No, do you know what? Skip this bit. You haven't missed anything important. That'll do as an intro. I just
No, go on.
one of the what am I trying to say here? What matters to say? I'm really excited to be working at NCB, really excited to be part of the leadership team there. I think the work that NCB does is really important, and I absolutely love the way that we have so many different kind of brands and teams and parts of our organisation that speak to all different areas of children's lives. And now, of
Mm,
course, with RIP being part of NCB, adults' lives too, because
yeah,
I'm right into boundary spanning me, and feels
yeah,
really good to be thinking about that life course approach.
yeah.
Shout out to my incredible team at Research in Practice. There's not many people who would feel able to say they could take on two quite chunky roles, and it's a testament to how extraordinarily brilliant my team at Research in Practice are. I've got to that really nice bit of leadership where I think the team just about still want me, but they don't need me very much. The dream, the sweet spot of leadership.
Yeah. So what will your new role or the other role entail?
So, as Deputy Chief Executive of NCB, I'm going to have the enormous privilege of supporting all of those other parts of our delivery, helping our excellent research and evaluation team, supporting my colleagues who work across education and early years and special educational needs and disabilities. We do some work in the health sector as well, work to address bullying, and supporting colleagues who work in things like policy influencing. So, it feels really enriching and really exciting.
Is that what you always thought you wanted to do?
God, I feared you might ask me a question like that. And and the
This wasn't in
really
the preamble questions. This is the tangent.
no, sorry, it says the really honest answer is I've never had a career plan. In fact, I'm not I'm the worst person to. Later, you're going to ask about advice for early career colleagues, aren't you? And I'm going to be equally stumped because who am I to give any advice? I've been really lucky. I've been lucky to have some bosses in my time, invariably, actually, if I think about it, women at school, at university, in my career in local government, who lifted me up, who pushed me, who challenged me, who stretched me, who made me go for opportunities that left to my own devices. I would have thought, oh no, that's not for me. And that's been, yeah, I feel very fortunate that I have never had a career plan. I've tended to follow my nose if it looks interesting and stimulating and useful. That's
Yeah.
quite a big driver. I've only realized that later in life, actually. If you'd asked younger me, what my drivers are, I don't think the word duty would have come up. But the older I get, the more I recognize that I'm very driven by whether I'm being useful. If I feel like I'm not being useful, I get quite
Mm.
agitated. That's not a comfortable
Yeah.
feeling for me. I think something as well, that having not had a career path or a career coach or any kind of long-term plan or 5-year goal or any of the stuff that TikTok tells you you're supposed to do, I guess there's a bit of a theme that I've been drawn to roles where I get to do boundary spanning, where I working in multi-agency settings or creating and chairing multi-agency panels or working at the
Mm.
interface of statutory and voluntary engagement or working at the interface of practice and policy or practice and research. I enjoy that sort of the hyphen
Yeah.
role, for want of a better word. I find that very interesting and I get a lot from being able to join dots or see connections. I'm a generalist. At points in my life, I think I probably felt very self-conscious about that I'm not a specialist in anything and I'm not an expert in any, or maybe I'm an expert now in transitional safeguarding, but I'm not an
Mm.
expert in out really. A little while ago, an ex-coach of mine gave me real food for thought and was saying to me that actually to be a professional generalist is a specialism. To be conversational in many languages, even if you're not fluent in any, that is
Yeah.
in and of itself a useful skill. And it really helped me reframe a bit of that. Oh, I'm not good enough because I'm not an expert in anything. And think, actually, no, it's okay to be an expert in breadth, not depth sometimes.
That's really helpful. Not that was for me, but I think because like I find it hard to just talk about one thing because everything's connected. So how can you just ever talk about one thing because it's always 10 different things?
Everything's
Um,
connected,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And I think lots of us, if given the space and support, and I think probably a lot of us in our sector, are natural systems thinkers. Once you're
Mm.
given the space to see and to name the fact that everything is connected and interconnected and intersectional, that can really liberate how I make sense of the world. I think that's true for many of us. And it's important. We shouldn't be thinking in silos, working in silos, acting in silos, atomizing people's lives, our own or those we serve, and pathologically individualizing and narrowing issues. It feels not fruitful to me,
Yeah.
but also it doesn't really resonate with how I make sense of information. And yeah, everything's connected.
Yeah. I
Stop
like
press. What an insight.
Yeah. I think sometimes we need reminders because we're in this like information economy where things get very siloed and there is this pull to want to be a binary in so many areas of life. Yeah, across everything. So actually, I think we do need the reminder that things do not always fit into these binaries
Yeah.
at all.
See, the one thing I might claim a little bit of expertise in is transitional safeguarding. Is when
Yeah,
that
you could probably
that
just say, I am the expert.
I am well supported by some amazing colleagues like Professor Christine Cocker and Dr. Eddie Cooper and members of my team as well. But in that, we talk a lot about the binary, not just the binary of childhood versus adulthood, as if there's no liminality, as if
Mm.
adolescence doesn't exist, but also the kind of the binaries that reinforce other binaries, victim versus perpetrator, goodies versus baddies, the vulnerable versus the culpable, the naughty
Mm.
versus the needy. And this sort of, and you see it accidentally played out in how we think about policy making. I think it's really excellent that we've got these kind of missions and the mission-led approach, and we're trying to see connected
Mm.
issues. And I'm also really keen to see some join up between the missions, because if over here we're creating opportunities for all, and over here we're creating safer streets, I want to know about those teenagers who deserve opportunities and are also not safe and making their streets not safe. I'm interested in the in-betweeniness, the liminality, the crossover, and And I think sometimes in our effort to specialize or our desire to have clear answers, which I really understand
Mm.
that craving we have for clear answers, definitive solutions, we fall into quite binary thinking sometimes. And I think you're absolutely right to recognize the sort of information landscape, and I would say the information architecture as well. It is not a
Mm.
bug, it is a feature. The information that we now receive is high in volume, variable in quality. It is intentionally designed to create outrage, to evoke feelings of polarization, of us and them, of being on a side. I used to really enjoy using Twitter. I would obviously post lots of stuff at work on there, but I also felt like I could
Mm.
post some of my opinions, I could have debates, and I've had a few people say to me in recent months, "Oh, someone said to me, you used to be really funny online." And I was like, no one's funny on LinkedIn. It's so bloody earnest, isn't it? It's like it's the social media equivalent of running around with those. Do you remember those burgundy record of achievement folders they gave out when you were 16? That's what LinkedIn feels like sometimes. If I had a
Yeah.
swear jar for every time I have to, or I start a post with "I'm thrilled," "I'm excited," "I'm delighted," I honestly, and I'm not knocking it. I appreciate being able to share our work and hear others'
Yeah.
work, but I no longer feel that it is rewarding or fruitful or in any way useful for me to be posting my views and my experiences online. And I'm not thin-skinned. I've been a
Mm.
woman on the internet. I have developed quite a thick skin. The state of my DMs, honestly. But I just don't think it is creating anything useful. There is not a place where I can personally at the moment have a meaningful discussion or debate or offer and receive nurture and intellectual stimulation around some of the issues that matter most globally, personally. And yeah, and there's a loss in that.
Yeah, that is a really helpful, like coming back to that idea of what is useful, because I like my whole whatever this is started with sharing online, not on TikTok, I can't handle that, but like place spaces like Instagram, and that I guess that it was like reflecting on connecting with what's useful. And I will often go to say something or record something and then think, actually maybe that was for me, wasn't for anyone else, and was it necessary? And I find it quite hard to decide what is useful and to who, because if, for example, it's very useful for people with white skin, I think, or for me as someone with white skin, to talk about anti-racism, for example, that becomes useful because it's not just for our black and brown colleagues. And then maybe some like political things are useful, but like you say, they get drawn into the binary. And then I get like angry about other things that are going on in social work. But again, it's coming back to that what's useful and for who, which I think is a nice
Yeah.
reflection.
You touched there on an important point about those of us who benefit from privilege, those of us who benefit from racist, sexist, ableist, heteronormative structures, using voices. And that's nuanced as well. Sometimes it's
Mm.
really important that I'm not taking up the space of someone else. Other times it's
Yeah.
really important that I'm not keeping quiet and looking complicit. And I'm not always going to judge that. I'm certain I don't always judge it correctly. I I found myself recently wanting very much to say something about a global event because it felt so unbearably horrific to not say something. And then I had to be like, who's it for? Is it that I need the world to know I feel this? What does the world care? When to choose a much more less serious issue, a celebrity dies and everyone has to rush to post how they feel about it. And I am never going to be important enough that people care what I think if X celebrity passes away. And there's just a bit sometimes of who's it for? Who is it that I need to see my outrage, my pain, my dismay, my despair, my... Does the world need to hear my view on, I don't know, pick a member of the royal family, the one I'm thinking of? Or am I simply going to be adding to the noise? The people
Mm.
who know me will absolutely know what I think. The people who don't know me don't care what I think. And it'll be some poor soul in my team who has to deal with the social media fallout. It no longer feels purposeful to me. I'm finding different ways of engaging my activism and using my time.
It's really interesting thinking about like public and private activism, isn't it? And yeah, I guess that because I always say that's like my most helpful question in practice. Who are you doing it for? Who are you writing that report for? Who are you writing that assessment for? Who are you doing that home visit for? that gives us like the biggest kind of insight, doesn't it? I've gone down a tangent of what happens publicly and privately on social media, but I suppose that links a little bit into, because you're a big deal. You say you saying something that you're in a really senior position of leadership, you hold a lot of influence. You're, I suppose, you really have to think about the most useful thing, and perhaps it's not fair, it's reductive to say that people, or is it, I don't know, is it reductive to say that people in leadership positions who are silent online are not still doing the most valuable work behind the scenes, and should it,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
All of
interesting.
this. First up, I am not a big deal. I want to be really clear about that. I'm not a big deal at all. There have been points in my career where it's felt important that I share what I'm thinking
Mm,
because it might give others permission to do, or it might be an important sort of line that I want to draw about my views and values. Occasionally, my loved ones will be like, why, this is back in the day of Twitter, why are you still having a debate with that bloke who's got loads of numbers and flags in his bio
yeah.
about the CSE definition? Pick an issue that's just brought a weekend. And I'd often say, because you never know who else is reading it. And maybe some of what I'm saying is useful for them in the debates that they're having. And all of that is true. However, I'm not a big deal. Not everything I say matters. Not everything I say is right. And I think that your other point there is really important. We are made up of so much more than our social media output or our academic output or even our professional output. And we're multifaceted, intersectional human beings made up of many parts. There used to be a meme that did the rounds about social media. I can't forget the details. But, ooh, I love crumpets. Person B, why do you hate muffins? And what we do or don't choose to express publicly may have little or no bearing on how we're spending our time, our money,
Yeah.
our energy, our emotional bandwidth privately. And I may never say never. Maybe I'll become one of those people that gets themselves on TikToks and has really TikToks. What a boomer is. I think it's the singular, not the plural, isn't it, Vicky?
I
Are you
don't even,
off
I don't know the answer.
TikTok?
I
Honestly.
can't handle it. I go on, I've been on there because I do some training for social media for social workers. And basically went on, typed in social worker, saw all these horrendous day in the life of a social worker. Here I can see, like, I could see lanyards, I could see backgrounds, I could see, so I went on as
Yikes.
like the research for then the training to be like, don't do this, please just don't do it. But that's as far as I
Crikey. There is a whole thing there about digital professionalism. I'm thinking about
oh,
Professor Amanda Beswick-Taylor. Yeah, anyway. I don't know. I wouldn't ever want to assume that a person's public output is the entirety of their value base, because I know it isn't for me. And to be really honest, there's been points in the past few years I have not had enough in my tank to
mm,
be picking an argument online with someone. And what I trying to be better and do better as an ally to marginalized groups is something that matters to me. But I also need to check myself for that performative allyship, because
yeah,
that's helping
yeah,
no one. That's not for anyone apart from me, is it? And that's not a good
mm,
use of my time. And sometimes we've got loved ones right next to us who need our attention right now. And I have made my peace with the fact that probably that has a damn sight more impact than me expressing my insert emotion square brackets about the recent insert current affairs event.
yeah.
I reserve the right to absolutely reverse it in time and I don't know, get all over Truth Social.
But no, it's, I guess it is coming back to that useful side, and research and practice and NCB are part of so many wider decisions that are being made. I did want to ask about something that you wrote. I think it was last year, and it's one of those things that I always like circle back to again. And you wrote about organizations having permission to learn out loud. And I'm thinking about the kind of crossover work and research, and yeah, the work that research and practice and NCB do with other organizations connected with social work, and about that thing of organizations having permission to learn out loud and make mistakes out loud. Obviously you think it's an important thing, but for people who are listening, who I'm aware will be in family facing work, often in a position where they might feel anger, resentment, or frustration to bigger organizations. So I could name them as Ofsted or Social Work England, and we name them even though they're made up of people. What do you think they need to know if they haven't read it, like the blog that you did? What do you think they need to know about this learning out loud
Um,
culture?
I remember the piece you're talking about. It was off the back of a really interesting, yeah, quite complex, not easy piece of work that we'd done, commissioned by one of the regulators. And in that, I was quite struck through the whole process of how difficult it must be if you work in or lead one of those national organizations that has lots and lots of structural power, how it's hard for any organization to do its learning out loud. I feel it, and Research in Practice is a relatively small little outfit, and we get a huge amount of good grace from the sector, and people are really relational and warm with us, and I think forgive us all sorts of imperfections. And and yet it's still not easy to say, oh, we didn't get that right, we're going to change what we do now. I can't imagine how hard it would be if you're working for example, a regulatory body or national government. We do tend to be, I think, quite guilty in our sector of using these big monolithic terms, government. Hang on, do you mean the politicians? And if so, do you mean cabinet or do you mean the backbenchers? Or do you mean anyone that's ever tried to go into local politics? Or do you mean the civil service? And if so, the senior one. I think sometimes it suits us to just homogenize and go, those guys, they don't get it. They're the baddies. And
Mm.
I'm not sure that reflects the values that I see in practice. We don't think it's fair, do we, when a person says all social workers are
Yeah,
X.
exactly.
It doesn't always feel useful. But I don't think it is good for anyone when we make it really hard for people to do their learning out loud. You look at how the press and the public react to yet another U-turn. I don't know. I tend to think that having your mind changed is quite a positive sign. Years ago, I remember, do you know what? It was actually the ex-chief executive of NCB about 20 odd years ago, Sir Paul Ennals, saying something that really stayed with me. I probably just made the connection with the ex-NCB boss about how if I go to a meeting and have my mind change, I consider that a really good use of my time. And it's
Yeah,
really stayed with me, and I say it often to people. I and yet, in positions of power, if you change your mind, it's a sign of weakness. It's a U-turn. It's flip-flopping, and I just don't think that's very healthy. I think that organisations with big structure, with great structural power, like regulators, for example, we should welcome and reward and recognise behaviours that show reflection and course correction and integration of new knowledge, and that to me
yeah,
seems like a really healthy learning system. It doesn't speak the binaries of goodies and baddies, though. And if you know who the baddie is, that means that you must be the goodie. And I suppose we find that very psychologically soothing, however inaccurate.
yeah,
I think it's really hard for organizations and for individuals to do our learning out loud, to do our learning in public. We associate learning with fallibility. God forbid we ever show that we're infallible, not infallible. It can be associated with shame because it means that we might have made a mistake or we don't know everything. I think for leaders, perhaps it might be particularly hard because for far too many years, there was this sense. I would say it's coming from quite a particular strand of 80s hero leadership stuff. And don't I mention
yeah,
Thatcher? That leadership is all about having all the answers, never making a mistake. I just don't think it's
yeah,
healthy or accurate. I I guess learning is hard for lots of reasons, but one of the things that makes it hard is it starts with saying, I don't know this, or
yeah,
I've been getting this wrong, or
yeah,
oh my goodness, all my career I've worked in a certain way, and now the evidence couldn't be clearer. That wasn't the one. That's really hard. It can speak to
yeah,
a sense of identity and everything. Someone asked me recently, like the three ingredients for good learning, and I dug it out because I thought you'd want to talk about learning in this podcast. And what I
yeah,
said at the time, and I reckon I still stand by this, is that three, not the only three, but three really key kind of conditions or ingredients for learning. Number one being humility, because of course we can't learn if we think we know it all in the first place. Secondly, safety, because to learn, we've got to feel safe enough to say, I need to learn, or I don't know everything, I'm going to do something differently, and not believe that we'll be punished or shamed for that. And the third probably being tenacity. Like none of us are supposed to know it all. We're all supposed to know a bit more next week than we did last week, and we should expect that. And
yeah,
and that some people talk about this growth mindset, and I guess what they're describing there, of course, it is the most usual thing in the world that we're always learning. Like them's the breaks, that's the drill.
yeah,
That's the absolute baseline we should expect from a human life. And we ask children, we ask parents in unbearably difficult situations to show progress. Show us you've done your learning. Show us you can concentrate in class.
mm,
Show us you've made the changes necessary. Show us you've really understood. the actions here and you've carried them out and you've made progress. And
Yeah.
we can't be setting a higher bar for those we serve than we do for ourselves.
Yeah, that's so true. It's one expectation over here and then another expectation over there, isn't it? And I also think about the kind of I'm on social media with work a lot, and I think about the speed. So when you think about the learning out loud and then the time it takes to implement change, I think we're so used to this like speedy, like 60-second long clips that when change then doesn't happen fast, we as a society, like we're losing the ability to think long term. And I guess you must
Yes.
change over time as well. And I sometimes I wonder if that criticism comes because it's you're maybe you're learning out loud, but then you're not perceived to be making the change fast enough because we've changed our perception of speed and change.
That's an interesting idea. I definitely think that some researchers would agree with you that we are doing something quite profound to our attention span and capacity with 24-hour news cycles and 6 seconds reels and things like that. It makes me think a lot about Kahneman's slow thinking, which I would say is essential reading for
Yeah,
any,
yeah.
not just social worker, but anyone who wants to work with people. The importance of slowing down and thinking deeply, and if in
Mm.
doubt, have another think. As the wonderful Professor Danielle Turney always used to say, if in doubt, have a think, and then another think, and then sit down and have a little think again. Um, and I guess actually there's something very human there that when change is so clearly needed, the pick an issue. Children not being recognised as victims despite their evident victimhood, or marginalised groups being treated unfairly and facing structural interpersonal discrimination, or whatever the issue might be. And we want change now because it's so serious and so important. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that the more important the change, the likelihood is the more complex and long-winded it's going to be to achieve that change. So the things that matter most and we feel most impatient about are the very things where we might have to hold our nerve. And I guess also take heart from some of the incremental change, because I don't believe you have to choose between revolution and evolution. I think the two go hand in hand, and some really powerful revolutions come about because of those smaller steps, that incremental evolutionary change. But don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm sat here being all zen with you. I'm an incredibly impatient, mardy woman sometimes.
It's hard to hold, isn't it? I love Liz Pemberton, so she does loads of work around that early racism, anti-racism in the early years. And she often in her training will say the change she knows needs to happen, like she won't see in her lifetime, we won't see in our lifetime. And that's a huge thing to comprehend when you're working towards something. We're used to that change becomes faster. To comprehend that change will not happen in your lifetime is massive zoomed out thinking, isn't it?
I agree. I think she's absolutely spot on there. I can remember Dr. A.D. Cooper, who was one of the key architects of making safeguarding personal, a way of an approach to how we think about helping adults be safe. And she often tells a story about how an academic colleague said, "Oh, culture change takes about 18 years." And AD replaying this, and I think it was an adult who draws on social care service, saying, "We haven't got 18 years, AD." And both things are true.
Yeah.
Like both things have to be true at once. The scale of change required means we've got to be in it for the long haul. And we
Mm,
might be planting seeds now that it'll be the next generation or 3 generations down the line that bear the fruit of, because everything's connected intergenerationally as well.
yeah.
And we sometimes have to hold on to enough of the kind of fury and dynamism that keeps us going to make the incremental changes or to change what we can within our sphere or within our lifetime. And yeah, it's hard to sometimes hold the both and.
Yeah, definitely. So thinking about then, because a lot of listeners are early career social workers, there are massive changes happening in children's social care at the moment, which will hopefully also, because they're connected, affect adult social care with Families First. There is going to be a new early career pathway in the next year or so. For social workers listening, are there any key takeaways that you would give them to hold on to that maybe we haven't touched already? Because we talked about a lot of change ideas.
So again, I should emphasize, not my job to tell social workers what to do. I consider myself very lucky to get to hang out with so many social workers and learn from them. But it is a time of huge change. Lots of changes in children's social care, huge changes to adult social care, justice reforms, immigration reforms, welfare
Mm,
reform. It's all connected. And change is the only constant. I know that's a really annoying cliche thing to say, and I've definitely rolled my eyes at points in my career when someone said that to me. And it's also something I say all the time because it's true. The only thing you can absolutely guarantee, death, taxes, and ongoing change.
yeah.
And there's something about how we kind of hold ourselves in that state of change. I've been really interested recently looking at some kind of articles and commentators who talk about how we need to completely unlearn how we think about change. In our sector, I think we're sometimes a bit guilty of the sort of idea that there'll be a busy period and then it will settle down. Once
Yeah.
we've implemented X, once we've done the changes here, once such and such has been rolled out, things will go back to normal or steady state. Kind of freeze, refreeze, unfreeze. And,
Yeah.
and lots of commentators now are saying that is a complete myth. I do myself. I've been telling myself there's going to be a quiet August since the late 90s. I've not had a quiet August since the late 90s. But we collude with this myth. Get to the busy bit, do the change, and then we'll settle down. And it's
Yeah.
not that. It is, as one person was reading, you've got to get your head around the fact that it's perpetual whitewater rafting.
Yeah.
That's the day job. And I don't say that to make anyone feel exhausted, but more to be ready for it. Because if we go into a role thinking there'll be a busy bit, then it'll settle down, it actually adds to the exhaustion and the frustration, and it can be quite debilitating. One of my colleagues, Lisa, is a keen surfer, and she wrote a blog a little while ago all about how surfing and leadership have commonalities. And
Yeah.
she and I sometimes talk about how I'm not a surfer because it's really hard to do in high heels. But like part of surfing, one of the mistakes that I understand you might make if you're beginning to learn to surf is trying to focus on like preempting the waves as if you can control
Mm.
the size and frequency of them. And of course you can't. The trick is just to control your core. Listeners, I believe, although I don't know from lived experience, the core is a muscle you have under the squishy bit in your stomach. I'm looking for mine still. But anyway, focus on your core. Like the job is to stay upright, not to control the size of the waves. This sort of, it's more like kind of change adaptability rather than change
Mm.
management. So yeah, focus on your core, focus on staying upright. That's the
Yeah.
gig is there's some researchers who look at resilience, they talk about how when we're feeling more resilient, when our resilience is a little more kind of evident, we're often better at bending and flexing. Like bendy trees don't break in the
Yeah. Yeah.
wind. That if we can roll with it a bit, those well-known academics, Oasis had the right idea. So that I think is a really important thing to hold in mind as you enter a
Yeah.
profession like this. I think there's something as well for early career colleagues to think about that you get really comfy with the both and not either
Mm.
or. Whether you're squaring the circle of being both an agent of the state and an activist, or recognizing that you work with people who are both at risk and a risk,
Mm.
whether you're spanning that boundary between kind of lived experience and learnt experience, because they don't exist in separate, hermetically sealed chambers. There's lots of both and liminality, in betweeniness, I think that's really helpful to hold in mind. I would obviously say get your geek on, be evidence informed,
Yeah.
unashamedly. Knowledge is a tapestry,
Yeah.
not hierarchy. No room for anti-intellectualism. No social worker ever has to think, oh, I can be well informed or I can be relational. Both and. Um,
Yeah.
and lastly, and I say this with some nervousness because I am not a jobbing social worker, so I don't want this to sound rude or critical at all. But very occasionally, I am quite struck by some of the kind of power narratives usually because I'm reading the work of a social worker who's offering really rich commentary. Every now and then, I notice some discourse that seems to centre the powerlessness of social workers, how tough it is, how it's the hardest job and it's the most difficult of situations. And I am not going to at all minimize how tough a job it can be. But I also think that social work is one of the most powerful roles that people can have.
Mm.
I find it hard to think of in a country where we don't have armed police, there are few powers of the state more significant than informing a decision to remove someone's child, inform the decision to deprive someone of their liberty. And I guess I really respect and find very useful, that's that word again,
Mm.
those social work commentators who point out the fact that social workers hold enormous power and wield enormous power, as well as sometimes feeling powerless.
Yeah.
And the work is a privilege. It is a privilege to
Mm.
involve ourselves in people's lives. You know, from my much more distant perspective, it is a privilege to involve ourselves in the professional learning of people who involve themselves in people's lives. And if
Yeah.
we lose sight of the privilege we hold and the power we hold, then that would seem to me to make a tough job much tougher and possibly a lot less useful to people.
Yeah. That's so, I think that's really helpful and really relevant. Is it? think it was Umar wrote a blog called Social Workers Aren't Superheroes, and it's all, which I massively agree with every word of this sort of, feel really uncomfortable with this superhero
Yeah.
narrative because it's rooted in like white supremacy and saviorism, yeah, and
Yeah,
it's not
but even like
helpful.
the language and narratives of heroes, that requires villains. Who are the villains in this?
Yeah, exactly.
I feel similarly about military language as well. I absolutely understand why people might refer to work in the trenches or on the front line, but for me, militaristic language, it really jars with social work ethics and ethos and values and
Yeah,
everything that I have come to know and love about the social workers that I engage with. And I notice the dissonance there.
yeah, yeah. No, I think it's really helpful, and it's helpful to leave people with because there is so many social workers with views online. I'm one of them, part of it, but I think it's about understanding what's sensationalized, why things are written. Again, coming back to who is it for? It's an article that digs into that superhero-esque narrative is usually written with a sensationalized headline, and it's attached to clicks, and clicks for lots of organizations lead to money, and sometimes that doesn't need to be labeled as bad or good, but sometimes there is a through line. And I think it's how when I do social media training, that's one of the things we think about. I think before you click is a helpful
Yeah,
one.
and you get right down to the brass tacks of it. We often ask, would it be good enough for my child, or would it pass the
Mhm.
mum test? And I it's helpful sometimes to just check ourselves and think, right, so if I was being supported by a obstetrician, what jokes would I like to see them writing online if I walked out of an appointment with them? I
Yeah,
choose obstetrician very deliberately because there's few things more personally integral to our identities and the help we
yeah,
get from obgyn professionals. And
yeah.
yeah, find that a useful litmus test sometimes.
No, that's really helpful. And then one very selfish question from me. What would be your advice for somebody who is about to start writing a book?
Oh God, I'm probably a
Apart from
terrible
like
person.
jungle versus classical music, think
Yeah.
about what you listen to.
The proper advice and the advice that the wonderful Professor Christine Cocker would endlessly give when we were trying to co-author our book together. Just write something. You can't edit a blank page. Do a little bit often. And she's absolutely right. And it is not how I can write. I am like a diesel engine. It can take me many hours to get started, and then I'll go for 16 hours, no breaks. I'm not a quick turnaround, you know. There's Pomodoro methods, write for 25 minutes and take 5 minutes break. Not if you're me. Absolutely not. That's not how my brain can work. I hyperfixation or bust. I think good advice, though, that might work for others. I like to sketch out the sort of narrative arc, the shape and color. What are the five chunks of this thing I'm writing?
Mm,
Like a story, you'd name your key characters, plot twist, happy or sad ending. You know, and that
yeah,
what's the loose shape of it? Can I get it on a postcard?
yeah,
And then flesh out. I also think it's really important to know what kind of writer you are. Are you someone who needs little and often regular breaks? You know, you're going to layer it up over time, or are you a diesel engine who's going to need, in that case, I can recommend that you get a metal cafetiere, not the glass ones. The metal ones stay hot for longer, and you don't break them as you tip your coffee into the compost bin. Pro tip there, folks.
yeah,
I really silly thing because it wasn't real work. It was about my professional kind of knowledge and expertise, but it wasn't work to do that book particularly. So I needed it to feel like a treat. I got new pajamas, sateen pajamas, like Noel Coward style. I had
yeah,
scented candles. It needed to feel a bit luxurious to me that I was going to sit at my desk
yeah.
for an inordinate amount of time
That's
writing.
really good advice, actually. I would never think about that. I guess for
Yeah.
anyone writing anything, really, because we do lots of writing in social work, don't we? But yeah, I like the create your environment a little bit
Yeah,
to make
it really matters
it.
to me. I
Mm,
realized how much it mattered to me. And then back to our earlier point about learning, treat all feedback as a gift. Expect it. Expect, and if you can, like hope to get 1,000 track changes back because that's a sign you've really interested whoever's reviewing it for you.
yeah,
So don't take it as like a dispiriting, like it is a gift and give it
yeah,
and receive it as such.
yeah. No, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. I feel like people already know what research and practice is, but I'll leave all links and bits and bobs on
Thank
the
you.
end of the podcast. And yeah, just thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.